Hello, wonderful patriots. I hope you're having a fantastic day. I'd like to talk to you about the rumors being circulated regarding Donald Trump being some sort of a hero in this Epstein case. Well, after an extensive amount of research that goes beyond the Epstein files, I can honestly tell you that that is absolutely incorrect. You know, there's a difference between being an informant and being a rat or snitch. An informant simply has information about a crime, whereas a rat or a snitch is involved in the criminal activity and snitches on the higher-ups in an attempt to get some sort of a deal, or like in the case of Jeffrey Epstein, immunity so far, and Donald Trump so far. I'd like to start by reading an Epstein file that I came across recently. Bear with me. I do try to censor out the vulgarity. All of this trafficking, it didn't begin with Donald Trump. It goes back to at least Reagan Bush Sr. days. We're talking about trafficking, smuggling, humans, drugs, weapons, whatever. But I think it goes even beyond that. Jimmy Carter, Nixon. You think Bush Sr. was the first in his family? Prescott Bush goes at least as far back as Prescott Bush, maybe even further. This did not start with Donald Trump, but it can end with Donald Trump, depending on us, depending on what we do. God certainly works in mysterious ways. There's a reason why Donald Trump was allowed to be president. And perhaps it was because this MAGA movement for transparency just couldn't be stopped. The MAGA movement, not Trump. Trump is not MAGA. MAGA is we the people. We the people, patriots, who demand transparency and justice. We will be judged by how we react to this transparency, to the knowledge of this massive global child trafficking network and satanic cult. Father God used Rome to build those roads before Jesus could come to earth and give his life for us so that the good news could spread around the world. And it did. Well, perhaps God put Trump in the presidency so that all of these crimes could be exposed in order to judge us by how we react. They say that Christ will return when the times are like they were in the days of Noah. In the days of Noah, they had Nephilim roaming the earth, devouring humans. And today, we also have monsters roaming this earth and devouring humans. In other words, the time to establish your relationship with Jesus Christ and Father God and the Holy Spirit, it's now. It's time to repent. Please like and share this video, as YouTube has a tendency of, YouTube's tendencies. I don't think I have to explain that to you. I also believe YouTube is complicit in these crimes because when I created a video the other day about the McMartin preschool connection to Jeffrey Epstein, they added a little bubble on the top of the screen stating that if you wanted, more information on the satanic panic, to click on that bubble. The satanic panic was created by the CIA, just like the word conspiracy theory was. It's just a gaslighting tactic. So YouTube is gaslighting people who are complicit in these crimes. So with that said, please pray and please like and share this video. And remember, as always, we believe the children. The media, the government, law enforcement have been gaslighting America and the world.
Mr. President, I know you've urged people to move on, but I'm curious, why do you think your supporters in particular have been so interested in the Epstein story and so upset about how it's been handled? Why do you think that is?
The different things, the Steele dossier, which was all fake, all that information was fake. But I don't understand why the Jeffrey Epstein case would be of interest to anybody. It's pretty boring stuff. It's sordid, but it's boring. And I don't understand why it keeps going. I think really only pretty bad people, including fake news, want to keep something like that going.
Costa, he allegedly said that he did work for an intelligence agency. So could you resolve whether or not he did? And also, could you say why there was a minute missing from the jailhouse tape on the night of the step?
Yeah, sure. If
Pam, did I just interrupt for 1 second? Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable. Do you want to waste the time, and do you feel like answering?
I don't mind answering.
I mean, I can't believe you're asking a question on Epstein at a time like this, where we're having some of the greatest success and also tragedy with what happened in Texas. It just seems like a desecration, but you go ahead.
Sure.
Epstein files, you talked about Democrats who were in there. Elon Musk was also in there, and so was your Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and correspondence that he had with him. Did you read those new files that were published by the Department of Justice?
I have a lot of things I'm doing, and a lot of things I'm doing. I don't know. You mentioned two names. I'm sure they're fine. Otherwise, it would have been major headlines.
A lot of women who are survivors of Epstein's are unhappy with those redactions that came out. Some of them, entire witness interviews are totally blacked out. Do you think that they should be more transparent?
The fact that they thought they released too much. I heard that, and you tell me something else. So, I think it's really time for the country to get onto something else. Really. Now that nothing came out about me, other than it was a conspiracy against me, literally, by Epstein and other people. But I think it's time now for the country to maybe get onto something else.
But what would you say to people who feel like they haven't gotten justice, Mr. President?
Something that people care about. Yeah, what did you say?
What would you say to the survivors who feel like they haven't gotten justice?
You are the worst reporter. No wonder CNN has no ratings because of people like you. She's a young woman. I don't think I've ever seen you smile. I've known you for 10 years. I don't think I've ever seen a smile on your face.
I'm asking you about survivors.
You know why? You know why you're not smiling? Because you know you're not telling the truth, and you're a very dishonest organization, and they should be ashamed of you.
These are survivors of a sexual abuse.
Trump losing his cool over Epstein. When asked about CNN's reporting that Vice President J.D. Vance was planning to hold a strategy session tonight on Jeffrey Epstein damage control, here's what the President of the United States said.
Look, the whole thing is a hoax. It's put out by the Democrats because we've had the most successful 6 months in the history of our country. And that's just a way of trying to divert attention to something that's total bullshit.
But this is what many people don't know. Looks like we have a complainant here, invited by Ville Neuve to a party on Palm Beach Island, Florida, to a residence she believes to have belonged to Jeffrey Epstein. Reported an unidentified female friend who was forced to perform on President Trump approximately 35 years ago in New Jersey. The friend told Alexis that she was approximately 13 to 14 years old when it occurred, and the friend allegedly bit Trump while performing. The friend was allegedly hit in the face after she laughed about biting President Trump. The friend said she was also abused by Epstein. Blank reported she has a friend, Leslie McMichael, who was a personal assistant to Epstein in Florida from 86 until 91 or 92. This friend shared names of some of the guests at Epstein's parties to include Bill and Donald Trump. At age 61 modeling, caller attended 8 parties at Epstein's New York residence. On one occasion, caller reported she was sexually assaulted by Epstein. On another occasion, 2 twin brothers, Alan and Orrin, lured caller and her friend upstairs, but they escaped back downstairs. Caller stated Orrin raped her best friend, and a third brother, Tal, raped a 14-year-old girl named Katie LNU. Caller named other individuals involved in big orgy parties with her, other young girls, and older Victoria's Secret models, including Bill Clinton and Donald Trump. Online complainant reported she was a victim and witness to a sex trafficking ring at the Trump Golf Course in Rancho Palos Verdes, California, between 95 and 96. Complainant reported Ghislaine Maxwell as the madam and broker for sex parties, clients of whom included Epstein, Robin Leach, and Donald Trump. Complainant reported participating in orgies and that some girls went missing, rumored to have been murdered and buried at the facility. Complainant reported being threatened by Trump's then head of security that if she ever talked of what went on there or who she saw, she would end up as fertilizer for the back 9 holes like the other C words. We need to dig up that golf course and that ranch. And we need to see if any of the missing girls are there. Complainant claims to have video of high-profile sex parties dealing with cartels and having witnessed Robin Leach strangle a young girl to death at a party. Claims he was contacted by a female victim of Epstein's who wants to publish a book. Complainant provided background to himself, such as working with prominent figures such as Leslie Wexner and Epstein. Being pardoned by a U.S. president, among several other pieces of information, the victim reportedly knew about criminal activity that occurred in multiple states and on airplanes, and told complainant there were films of prominent men such as Epstein, Bill Clinton, and Donald Trump, and that Ghislaine Maxwell is in the videos as well. Complainant reported meeting Elisa Villanueva at a hospital where they were roommates in 2000, who now goes by Ghislaine Lisa Villanueva. That's weird. Complainant was invited by V to a party on Palm Beach Island, Florida, to a residence she believes to have belonged to Epstein. There she met a model scout named Bobby Cox, whom V allegedly referred to as a pimp. Complainant stated V spoke with a hostess at the residence, whom complainant believed to be Ghislaine Maxwell. Well, at this party, complainant stated that they had all been invited by Donald Trump to a party at Mar-a-Lago. Complainant told V she wanted to go to the party and was allegedly told by V that it was for prostitutes. One complainant was 14 years old. Ghislaine Maxwell allegedly approached her about modeling, international travel, and massages. Complainant never reached out to Maxwell because the offer sounded as if it was mostly based around modeling, which complainant was unable to do because of a hip defect. Complainant made a podcast of her story about her encounter with Ghislaine Maxwell when she was approximately 14 to 15 years old. Complainant reported his ex-girlfriend's daughters were victims of Epstein's, and one was murdered. While working as a limousine driver, complainant recalling picking up Donald Trump in 1995 to take him to Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. During that ride, complainant recalled some of the things Trump spoke about on his cell phone was very concerning and describing a few seconds from pulling the limousine over on the median. and within a few seconds of pulling him out of the car and hurting him due to some of the things he was saying. Complainant noted Trump repeatedly stated the name Jeffrey while on the phone. One of the complainant's ex-girlfriend's daughters told complainant Trump raped her, as did Epstein. Caller is talking about crimes committed against her. She claims to be a prisoner. She references Lisa Marie Presley, the British royal family, President Trump, and Jeffrey Epstein. Lives in Australia. I found a whole folder on Australia, and Trump is in it. Trump is in the next one, too. Is this all Trump? Complainant reported her neighbor sought modeling gigs at the Trump Modeling Agency in New York City between the years of 98 and 2000. Complainant reported neighbor allegedly went on cruises set up by a recruiter or head of the agency and once showed complainant a photo of the recruiter whom complainant recalled looking like Epstein. Caller provided information to reference prior civil case from 13 years ago that involved Trump and mentioned Jeffrey Epstein with a minor. Complainant following up after a call with NYPD officer regarding her previous tip reporting that she was forced to perform oral sex when she was 13. This is Trump. Complainant also reported there were high-profile individuals involved in her sex trafficking and the murder and disposal, oh good Lord, of her newborn daughter. Complainant reported Donald Trump participated regularly in paying money to force her to perform sex acts with him, and alleged Trump was present with her uncle when her uncle murdered her newborn child. Caller was taken by boat to Epstein Island. Caller reported the school was mad at her for not being a Trump person and that the school wanted her to testify and say things against Andrew Cuomo. The FBI and Donald Trump were on the phone during the meeting. Caller believes the FBI has baby pictures of her with Epstein. What? Caller reported that in '87 a friend was out drinking and ended up at Trump Plaza. Victim one saw Donald Trump and wanted to meet him. An unknown man approached her and offered to introduce her to Trump. The unknown man gave victim one a drink, and victim one woke up naked and sore with $300 on the bed. She remembered seeing a flash of Trump's face. Victim one called the caller and told her she thought she had been raped. Victim one did not go to a hospital to have a rape kit performed because she didn't think anybody would believe her, especially because she was drunk. Victim one's husband's business had problems with suppliers, and victim one believed Trump was behind it. Victim one also started dating a lawyer, identifiers unknown, who was married. Victim one had a fight with her lawyer boyfriend and went to a bar. Victim one left a bar with a man who no one in the bar recognized, but who seemed familiar with victim one. Victim one was never seen again. A few years ago, remains were discovered that matched the description of what victim one was wearing when she went missing. DNA tests at the time were inconclusive. 2004-2005, Sir Ivan Wilczek hosted a party where Jeffrey Epstein, Sammy Sosa, and Donald Trump were in attendance. Patti LaBelle's PR agent stood at the door. At the party, caller met an individual who was approximately 18 to 23 years of age, who was brought from Oklahoma for a modeling job, but then sold to a man in France. A couple of years later, caller called Colette at the Cheetah Club in New York and told one of Santos' friends that Jamie Foxx was interested in spending a night with her and that he could pay her a lot of money. Donald Trump, the president, had parties at Mar-a-Lago called Calendar Girls, with Jeffrey Epstein would bring the children in and Trump would auction them off. He measured the children's vulva and vaginas rated the children. The guests were elder men and included Elon Musk, Donald Jr. Trump, Ivanka Trump, and Eric Trump were there. Alan Dershowitz was also there, with attorney Bob Shapiro. We were taken in rooms, forced to give oral to President Trump, forced to allow them. I was 13 years old and Donald Trump raped me. Ghislaine was present.
to stop. I can't read anymore. EFTA 01660653.
No, you touched the document because you redacted one name and you redacted the lawyer's name, but you left the survivor's name there. The next document I want to show you, and that was in the title, the victims' survivors' names, all right? The title of this one is Child Sex Trafficking. Co-conspirators, fully redacted. And by the way, I'm going to unredact them here. Les Wexner is in this. Now, your deputy attorney general said, oh, well, he appears hundreds of times in the files, but he doesn't appear in this file until I forced you to release it, where he's listed as a co-conspirator, not to tax evasion, but to child sex trafficking, not to prostitution, not to money laundering, child sex trafficking. And then finally, what we have here is the third exhibit that I have is emblematic of the FD 302 release. These are the documents that we need that you're holding on to and over-redacting because they have the names of the men who are implicated. How do we know? Because the survivors gave testimony to the FBI, and it's in there. And what happens when you go to the portal at the DOJ to look at what's behind this redaction? Another redaction. So we can't even see them. And then there's some of these files you've pulled down from the website that we will never see because we can't search the redactions. So I have several questions for you. Who's responsible? Are you able to track who in your organization made this massive failure and released the victims' names? Are you able to track who it was that obscured Les Wexner's name as a co-conspirator in an FBI document? Do you have that kind of accountability?
I believe Wexner's name was listed more than 4,000 times.
Yeah, I already told you that. This is where he's listed as a co-conspirator.
Can I finish my answer? Come on, let me finish my answer. We corrected that within 40 minutes. He was already, you're acting like everybody's trying to cover up Wexner's name.
Reclaiming my time.
I'm going to answer this question.
Reclaiming my time. Mr. Chairman.
This is how this works.
Can I have my time?
Mr.
Chairman.
The gentlelady can give her answer. The time belongs to the gentleman from.
All right, I'm reclaiming my time.
Can I give my answer?
So I'm going to put the language of the bill up on the screen.
Chairman, may I give my
another
answer
question
on that?
Here's the question.
Joke, and I need to give my answer on that.
We'll let the Attorney General respond, and then the gentleman can move to his next question.
It's my time.
Within 40 minutes, you asked me a question. Within 40 minutes, Wexner's name was added back.
Within 40 minutes of me catching you red-handed.
There was one redaction.
Where he's listed as a co-conspirator.
And we invited you in.
Show the video.
This guy has Trump derangement syndrome. He needs to get, you're a failed politician. You need to
watch the video.
Chairman, please restore his time and remind the witness of the rules here.
There is no credible information. None. If there were, I would bring the case yesterday that he trafficked to other individuals.
Is that your position as well?
My position is any victim who comes forward, of course, we would love to hear from them. 1-800-CALL-FBI. Did you ask Merrick Garland that the last 4 years? Did you talk about Epstein?
I am reclaiming my time. I'm glad you're asking about Merrick Garland.
You don't get to reclaim time
this is bigger than Watergate.
When I don't answer the question
This
the way you
goes
want.
over 4 administrations. You don't have to go back to Biden. Let's go back to Obama. Let's go back to George Bush. This cover-up spans decades, and you are responsible for this portion of it.
And that's where the
I want to know at what point did the FBI and the DOJ decide that Lex Wexner was not a co-conspirator? Because our Epstein Files Transparency Act requires you, please put it back on the screen, please, to release the internal decision about whether to prosecute him or not, and it's not in the files, and it's not in the files for any of these other men.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
May she answer?
And he's a hypocrite because he voted against the ban that we were talking about on deep fake AI porn. Only 2 people voted against it, and you were one of them, hypocrite.
The gentleman's time has expired.
You didn't answer the question.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman, could she answer the question?
Chairman, I was wondering,
The gentlelady's allowed, the Attorney General's allowed to respond the way she wants to respond to any member's questions, Republican, Democrat.
I have unanimous consent request.
Gentleman's recognized for a UC.
All right. This is an example. I'm submitting these 302 forms that are entirely redacted, even when you go to look at them.
Without objection.
I'm submitting a witness statement that implicates Les Wexner.
Without objection.
I'm submitting an article from the New York Times that the DOJ released nude photos and identifiable pictures of the victims. I'm submitting a letter from A.G. Bondi, the Kash Patel, imploring him to quit keeping the files when you found out that they were keeping files from you, because they're still redacting files.
Chairman, are we going to recess for votes?
Yes, we are.
I'm submitting for unanimous consent a document of 17 individuals who've resigned because of the Epstein files.
Without objection.
Good morning. Today is July 25, 2003. I'm Ted Gunderson, former FBI agent. I entered on duty in 1951, retired March 1979. At the time of my retirement, I was in charge of the FBI Los Angeles Division, which was responsible for most of Southern California. I had over 700 personnel under my command and a budget of $22 million. Shortly after I retired, I was asked to investigate, as a private investigator, the Dr. Jeffrey R. McDonald case. It was after that, the investigation of this case, that I realized some of the serious situations that confronted our nation today. Within 10 months of entering the case, I obtained a signed confession from one of the assailants. Dr. McDonald had been convicted of the crime. It involved the murder of his wife, pregnant, and 2 children, 2.5 and 5.5 years old. The courts refused to accept my confession. The girl's name was Helena Stokely, saying that she was not credible. However, in researching the matter further, I learned that Helena had been an informant for the government and also for the local Fayetteville, North Carolina Police Department. So, in other words, she was not credible in connection with the McDonald case, but she was credible enough before this to work with various government sources. Helena told me that that night was her initiation into a satanic cult. This cult was involved in distributing drugs up and down the East Coast, drugs that were being flown in from Southeast Asia in military and planes. The operation was by the certain Army personnel and also CIA. She told me that there were generals involved in the drug operation, there were police officers, and at least 2 attorneys in the Fayetteville, North Carolina area. As a result of receiving this information, I went public. And from going public on talk shows, TV shows, and so forth, people from throughout the country came to me with the same basic stories. People from the East Coast and the West Coast, South, Midwest, and Northwest. It was then that I realized these people who did not know each other were furnishing the same basic information about satanic cults. And of course, as a result of this, I delved further into this situation. The path that this led me down is mind-boggling. Over the last 23, 24 years, I have developed so much information about the situation as it exists in our great country and gone public with it as much as possible, and yet I'm being ignored. And the information I have furnished to authorities is being ignored. And I'll go into that later on in this interview. But the point in question here is, this is when the lights went on for me. Now, in looking through the situation, and as a result of my research, of course, I knew that we were advised about Pearl Harbor several days before the attack on Pearl Harbor. It was supposed to be a surprise. I knew that we were advised about Pearl Harbor several days before the attack on Pearl Harbor, yet it was supposed to be a surprise attack. I talked to the naval intelligence officer who received the message in Washington, D.C. on December the 4th, 1941, that the Japanese were going to attack Pearl Harbor. He sent the message on to his superiors. After the war, he was subpoenaed before a committee, congressional committee. He was told by his superiors at that time, ignore the subpoena. You don't understand now, but you will later on. As we all know, and as well documented, we knew in advance of Pearl Harbor. It was covered up. And then you have the Jack Kennedy assassination. There was more than one shooter involved in the Kennedy assassination. Lee Harvey Oswald was a pawn. It was a combination of the CIA and the Chicago mob, Sam Giancana. This is very well documented in a TV series that's appeared on A&E about every 6 months, as a matter of fact. It's called The Men Who Killed Kennedy by Nigel Turner, an English producer. And then we had Bobby Kennedy assassination. Bobby Kennedy's assassination, there were more bullet holes in the walls and the doors than Saran's weapon, gun, could hold. There were more people involved in that, another cover-up. And then we had the most notary of all after that, subsequent, was Ruby Ridge. Randy Weaver refused to be an informant for the government. He was set up, and he had refused to appear in the courts. And as a result, we had the Ruby Ridge fiasco, where an FBI sharpshooter killed his wife while holding the baby, another cover-up. And then we had Waco. Waco was an unbelievable situation because the military was there, took on the Koresh and his followers. And that's in direct violation of Posse Comitatus, whereby the military is not allowed to become involved in the enforcement of civilian population. Of course, the FBI was there also, and BATF was also there. There were four BATF officers who were shot, and the Koresh people were blamed for the shooting. However, in researching that matter, I have learned that all 4 BATF agents took a shot to the head. Now, this means that there was a sharpshooter there, and in one instance, the bullet came from above into the man's lip and down into his body. That was just one. In further research in the matter, I learned that these 4 BATF agents had at one time been a bodyguard for Bill Clinton, the President of the United States. And next we had the World Trade Center bombing in February 1993. Unfortunately, there were 6 people killed. But what happened there was the FBI had an informant, Salam, a 43-year-old former Egyptian army officer, and he wore a body mic when he went in on his contacts with the terrorists. And as a result, they had an open and closed case at the trial. However, he testified at the trial that he also wore a body mark when he was interviewed by the FBI agents. And at that time, he said that, hey, I've been commissioned to put the bomb together by the terrorists. We're going to use a dummy bomb, aren't we? His superiors in the FBI said, no, we're going to use a real bomb. The point being, the FBI not only knew in advance of the bombing of the World Trade Center in February 1993, the FBI furnished the ingredients for the bomb. Documentation, New York Times article, October 23, 1993. But then we had Oklahoma City. And in Oklahoma City, which occurred in 1995, they claimed that Tim McVeigh and Nichols were involved. I personally made 2 trips to Oklahoma City out of my pocket and investigated the case. I have a 220-some page report that's available to the public concerning this situation. And I was told by an inside investigator that there were at least 11 other people involved in Oklahoma City. And then after Oklahoma City, we had the World Trade Center. Of course, September 11th, 2001. And it's been well documented through numerous sources, and I'll go into that more in detail in a few minutes, that there was much more to this than we've been told by the mainstream media. And as a matter of fact, if you look at those last 3 cover-ups, World Trade Center, February 93, Oklahoma City, and World Trade Center 2001, you will note that there's a Middle East connection in all 3 of them. Now, after the Jeffrey McDonald case, I was involved in a number of other investigations, which I have learned have also been covered up by authorities who are responsible for investigating these matters. In addition to the Jeffrey McDonald case, I investigated a case on the West Coast, Manhattan Beach, California, called the McMartin trial, McMartin preschool case. The children said that after they were dropped off by their parents in the morning, the authorities, the teachers, in a number of instances, took them down through tunnels and up into a trapdoor, the triplex next door, placed them in automobiles, took these 2, 3, 4-year-old children out into the community where they were prostituted. The authorities again claimed that this is not true. The children were exaggerating. They were influenced by their therapists. Well, in 1990, I had an opportunity to gain control of the McMartin school property. I hired along with some of the parents, of course, I hired an archaeologist, Dr. Gary Stickler from UCLA, and we began an excavation of the property. The authorities had looked for tunnels under the school in 1987, said there were none, they could find none. Well, Dr. Gary Stickler, after 34 days, specifically stated that there were definitely tunnels there. He came up with this conclusion in the middle of the second trial of Ray Buckey. We called the district attorney's office. He sent an investigator named Perez out who argued with Dr. Stickler that there were no tunnels in the school. The authorities ignored the fact that we did find these tunnels. In other words, the children, in my opinion, were telling the truth. At least they were telling the truth about the tunnels. Now, other activity that the children claimed they were involved in or were exposed to were adults in robes chanting with candles. They talked about the burning and the sacrifice and the murder of babies in ceremonies, obviously a satanic ceremony. This is just a touch of what I've been involved in. I might also mention that in the late 1980s, I was actively involved in what's called the Franklin cover-up. This is a case where children were flown from Sioux City, Iowa to Washington, D.C. for sex orgies with congressmen, senators, and it goes all the way, at that time, up to the White House. And this case, again, was covered up. I've written letters to the Attorney General of the United States, to the Attorney General of the state of Nebraska, and documented this. And as a matter of fact, I have a report that contains details concerning this case. and it ties into an organization in Washington, D.C. known as the Finders. This is my report on the Finders. And this not only is documented out of my investigation with former State Senator John DeCamp, it's documented through U.S. Customs. In 1987, the Tallahassee Police Department received a phone call anonymously from an individual who said that there were two well-dressed men and a number of children in the park. The police went down, arrested the man, looked at the children. The children didn't even know how to use toilets or telephones. They traced the case to Washington, D.C., to the Finders. And in researching this, and as a result of the information furnished by the U.S. Customs agent, in fact, I have the U.S. Customs agent report here, it was noted that the Finders, an organization established in the early 1960s, was involved in kidnapping children. And I have the last paragraph of the last page of the Customs report in front of me. And let me just read this portion to you. This Customs agent arrived at the scene of the Finders on April the 2nd, 1987. And he was told by the Metropolitan Police officers who had conducted searches there through search warrants that the circumstances which indicated that the investigation into the activity of the Finders had become an internal CIA matter. The Metropolitan Police report has been classified secret and was not available for review. I was advised, this is the Customs agent, that the FBI had withdrawn from the investigation several weeks prior, and that the FBI Foreign Counterintelligence Division, that's Division 5, had directed the Metropolitan Police Department not to advise the FBI Washington Field Office of anything that had transpired. The Washington Field Office is the investigative branch of the FBI in the Washington, D.C. area. So this was not only withheld from the public, it was also withheld from their own agents within the organization. The kidnappings of children, the missing children in this country, is a very serious matter. I have in front of me a July 1982 Reader's Digest article about missing children. And this article states that 100,000 children disappear every year and are never heard from again in the United States. Now, we're not talking about runaway teenagers. We're talking about 2, 3, 4-year-old children. I have personally made formal complaints to the FBI on this case on 6 occasions and been ignored. By the way, let me also show you a headline in the Washington Times, which is dated June 29, 1989. And this headline points out the homosexual probe ensnarls officials of Bush and Reagan. What better documentation do you need? Again, I have been ignored. And it's inconceivable that a person with my credibility, a person who was one time was one of the top executives in the FBI, would file a complaint with the FBI and be ignored. So we have the cover-up in Pearl Harbor, Jack Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Ruby Ridge, Waco, World Trade Center 93, Oklahoma City 95. We have 9/11 in 2001. And then I personally go out in the interim and during that same period and develop information about criminal activity that's taking place in this country, and I am ignored. Well, in order to understand the situation, let me tell you a little about Promise Software. Promise Software was a computer that was developed by Bill and Nancy Hamilton out of Washington, D.C. It was able to gather together and contain information, compile information concerning law enforcement, the court procedures, the judge activities, of course, as far as the courts were concerned, and other activity at various levels, all levels, basically.
Now, I researched this quite a while back. I've known about Ted Gunderson for about 15 years, I guess. At least 10 years. But I believe it was determined that that software was developed by Ghislaine Maxwell's sister.
What it was an intelligence gathering device, and the Department of Justice leased this from the Hamiltons for 2 years. At the end of 2 years, they refused to pay the Hamiltons the $10 million that they owed to the Hamiltons. The Hamiltons went into court, bankruptcy court, filed a lawsuit. They won in court, but the court said, you're in the wrong court. You need to go to the district court. And, of course, they had spent over $1 million at that point and couldn't continue to carry the case out at another level. Now, after the Department of Justice refused to pay the Hamiltons, they gave the Reagan administration, through former Attorney General Meese, gave the Promise software to a fellow named Earl Bryant. Earl Bryant's former owner of the United Press International. Bryant then took this computer, Promise software, sold it to the Canadians, the English, the French, and the Israelis. And what the British, Canadians, French, and Israelis didn't know at the time was that we had put a trapdoor in that computer, so all the information, intelligence information that those countries gathered was also available to us, unknown to those countries, of course. The person who put that trapdoor together was an individual named Michael Riconosciuto. Michael was an intelligence agent for a number of years, and the Brooks Committee in the 1980s, around 1990 actually, late 1980s, early 1990s, had a hearing. Michael was contacted and asked to testify about his involvement in installing the trapdoor into this computer. And he received a phone call, according to Michael, from a fellow named Vietnix with the Department of Justice. Vietnix told him, if you testify before Congress, you will be sorry. Michael refused, ignored the warning, and testified. 6 weeks later, he was arrested for drugs, tried, and sentenced to 30 years. Michael claims he was set up on the drug arrest. I am inclined to believe that's true. This is a first offense, drug offense. You get 30 years. Michael's only mistake there was that he was testified and told the truth. I have been Michael's investigator of record for 20-some years. I met Michael in 1982. And for a year and a half prior to 9/11, I attempted to get in and see Michael in prison. I was not allowed into the prison to visit him at that time, at any time during that period. I was finally able to gain access to Michael in January of 2003. And as a matter of fact, I spent 3 days with Michael, January 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And Michael gave me information, and the reason he'd been trying to get to me and give me this information about his involvement, or his development, actually the development, not involvement, the development of information concerning a terrorist activity in America. Michael told me at that time that in January, February 2001, he, through his sources, had gained information that there would be terrorist attacks in the United States by the Arabs. Now, you have to understand, the question arises, how could Michael develop this information while he's in prison? Well, in the spring of 1986, I was contacted by a high-level official in the Reagan administration, asked if I could help the Afghan rebels in their fight against the Soviets. I contacted Michael, knowing Michael's contacts within the community, the intelligence community, and his knowledge of weapons. And Michael and I met with an individual from the State Department / CIA, and there was a fourth person there, Tim Osman. We later learned that Tim Osman was Osama bin Laden. As a result of that meeting, I actually didn't do much. I just introduced the parties, and then I dropped out of the picture. But as a result of that meeting, Michael continued and ended up furnishing the surface-to-air missiles to the Afghan rebels that defeated the communist Soviets. Now, you have to understand this also. This was a patriotic move by me because we were fighting the communists. Bin Laden was our ally, our friend at that time. So that's how Michael developed this information. Now, Michael told me in my prison visit with him in January that he made every effort to contact authorities, was unsuccessful, and finally his attorney in Chicago was able to write a letter to Colin Powell. He told Colin Powell, Secretary of State, that Michael, he didn't use the name Michael, he said one of his clients, had information about a forthcoming terrorist attacks. And it was subsequent to that that Michael was interviewed in March of 2001 by an FBI agent. I might also mention that this attorney in Chicago furnished this information to the U.S. attorney and to the FBI in Chicago and had meetings with FBI agents there. So Michael was interviewed by the FBI in March of 2001, and at that time he told the FBI Agent Kutry, resident agent out of the Williamsport, Pennsylvania resident agency, that he had information, and he furnished the identification of the American, so-called American, but actually was Arab, in New Jersey, who was coordinating forthcoming terrorist attacks on the United States. I'm reading from the report that I did, by the way. Had information on the movement of Soviet-made shoulder-fired missiles into the United States, was coordinating forthcoming skyjackings, was coordinating bombings and espionage, knew the identity of sleepers in the United States and overseas. Michael also told the FBI agent that he had information about 37 Soviet missiles that were to be smuggled into the United States from Bulgaria to Colombia to Canada and then to through a Canadian air firm into the United States. And he told the FBI that there was a 30-hour window when we could have grabbed these missiles. So Michael thought he had done his patriotic duty, furnishing this information to the FBI. And on September the 11th, 2001, he was quite shocked and surprised at the occurrence of 9/11. On September the 13th, 2001, he was visited again by Special Agent Kutry of the FBI, and there was another unidentified agent with him. And at that time, here's what Kutry said to Riconosciuto. He wanted to know why Riconosciuto was bothering the FBI and wasting its time. He accused Riconosciuto of seeking publicity, accused Riconosciuto of being anti-FBI and anti-government, called Riconosciuto a conspiracy theorist, called Riconosciuto a know-it-all, called Riconosciuto a hoaxer, and threatened him with prosecution. Now that isn't all. Let me mention this, that shortly after I sent a letter to Senator George Allen of Virginia, and in this letter I asked the senator to communicate with the FBI and determine the exact date that Michael was interviewed in March 2001. We wanted to verify, and we wanted the FBI itself to confirm that they'd interviewed Michael, right, for documentation. Shortly after I sent this letter to the senator, 4 of Michael's friends who had been in communication with Michael while he was in prison and were not knowledgeable, professionally knowledgeable about terrorism, were contacted by the FBI. The FBI, without search warrants, seized their computers, and they demanded all letters, documents, correspondence, books, and so forth, and also inquired about the Arabs' contacts of Riconosciuto. Those people said that they were more interested in the Arab contacts than they were in any information that Michael had given to them. This information that I'm giving to you is, by the way, is documented, well documented, in Michael's personal letters, in his handwriting. Here's one of his letters. I'll hold this up for you. This is an example. Okay, that's Michael's handwriting. And here is the one of the letters he wrote to his attorney. And the date stamp on this is February the 6th, 2001. You can see it right up here in the corner. So this information is well documented, and as well as establishing through the date stamps, postal stamps, that it is a timely information. I took this report that I compiled as a result of my work with Michael and contacts with Michael. I was in Washington, D.C. for 3 weeks, and I disseminated this report to every committee on the Hill, to 155 congressmen, senators, and also to Mr. Lee Hamilton, who is co-chairman of the President's Commission to investigate 9/11. I also had a personal telephone conversation with Mr. Lee Hamilton, and at that time I said, and I sent this January 29, 2003, I said, Michael has considerably more information about terrorist activity than is in my report. For example, he claims to have details concerning the anthrax letters to the Congress. This is my communication to the senator. I was in Washington. I did not have access to a typewriter, so I wrote it in longhand. I also sent a letter to Senator Leahy, New Hampshire, and I gave him the same basic information. And I told him Michael had other information on the 9/11 attack, and he also knows the identity of the person who has the anthrax letters. Here's my letter for communication to the senator, okay? And then I took my report and I disseminated it to the U.S. Attorney General of the United States, to Mr. Glenn Fine, Inspector General, U.S. Department of Justice, Tom Ridge, Homeland Security, Roscoe Howard, U.S. Attorney, Washington, D.C., John Keeney, Criminal Division, Department of Justice, John Roberts, Office of Professional Responsibility, Department of Justice, Rob Davis, Office of Intelligence and Policy, Department of Justice, Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense, the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Pentagon, Colin Powell, State Department, Intelligence and Research, State Department, CIA, Washington, D.C., Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, State Department, Kenneth Melson, U.S. Attorney, Northern District of Virginia, the National Security Agency, State Department also, and National Security Advisor, with the State Department, National Security Council, NSC, the White House, that's the intelligence branch of the President, by the way, Paul McNulty, U.S. Attorney, Alexandria, Virginia, Tommy Thompson, Secretary of Health, and so forth. I took my report also, and I contacted the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the LA Times. I call them the Three Sisters. And I gave them a copy of the report, and I followed up with a telephone conversation, and I learned that they were not going to print the story. I also gave the report to the Associated Press in St. Paul, Minnesota. And this is, I contacted the reporter who has been in touch with Colleen Rowley, the FBI agent who tried to get a search warrant on Missouri and was turned down. And his name is Patrick Cow. And I called him 10 days later and I said, "Are you going to report my story?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because it's too big. It's too big to report." I can't believe it. As a result of I'll say, stirring up the pot, which is what I did, of course, we finally received a letter back from the FBI, and this is dated May 22, 2003. And it is signed by Mr. Larry Mefford, M-E-F-F-O-R-D. And in this letter, Mr. Mefford says, Mr. Reconnaissance has contacted the FBI on numerous occasions alleging he has information regarding terrorist-related activity that would be of interest to the FBI. On each occasion, the FBI has made every effort to accommodate Mr. Reconnaissance and investigate his allegations. Now, hey, wait a minute. Mr. Kutry told Reconnaissance when he talked to him September 13th that they did not investigate the allegations as made by Michael Reconnaissance because they didn't think he was telling the...
Friends, that's where I'm going to end the Ted Gunderson interview. Please go check it out. Check out everything that he's provided. This man was a real American hero. God bless him. God bless his family. May he rest in peace. Thank you, Ted Gunderson.